Everybody, welcome back to Capricorn Radio. This is your host James, and I'm delighted to be speaking to a new guest today, Mr. Stephen Bassett, a leading advocate for the ending the 60-year government-imposed truth embargo involving the extraterrestrial presence engaging with the human race. Political activist, lobbyist, commenter, columnist, conference producer, founder of the Paradigm Research Group, which we're going to get into today, and we're going to see where the research is at today. Also, the executive director of the Extraterrestrial Phenomena Political Action Committee, XPPAC, the creator of the Paradigm Clock, and the executive producer of the X Conference. I want to get into a little bit about that too. Going back as far as '96, Bassett, he has assisted many organizations and initiatives making the case for the end of the government's truth embargo, to open congressional hearings to take the testimony of former military and agency employees that have witnessed to extraterrestrial-related events and evidence. He's also appeared on hundreds of radio and television talk shows, and I'm glad he's on Capricorn Radio today. So without further ado, let's bring on today's guest. Hi, Stephen. Welcome to the show.
It's great to be with you, James. Great to be with you.
Stephen, great to have you here. You know, if I'm fair to say, you really kind of... You came from, I think, the research of John Mack and got involved there, and then carved a niche in the UFO market, if you want to call it that, and research with the disclosure. And credit to you for that, Stephen, because you really have commanded this advocacy, as you call it. Great to see that has happened, because I think that was the part of the whole UFO research that was missing, Stephen. Would that be fair to say?
Well, it was part of the extraterrestrial phenomena issue that was missing, but the government was principally responsible for that. The government's position, going back to 1940s, 50s, was we won't do any investigations that can lead to a resolution. We will pretty much deny that there is a matter there to deal with. We will ignore witnesses. In other words, no matter how credible they are, we just won't respond. We'll undermine the research with disinformation when we can, and we'll contain the issue. So that was a political policy. Citizen scientists spent years studying the phenomena in every way possible with limited resources. Mm-hmm. And established a huge body of evidence, but it didn't matter. And ultimately, by the time I entered the field in '96, it was quite clear no amount of science would be enough to suddenly have the government come out and say, you got us. That this is a political policy that had to be addressed politically in order to get it resolved, at least in any time soon.
Mm-hmm. So you left Cambridge in '96 to set up the advocacy organisation, the Paradigm Research Group. Tell us the aim of the Paradigm Research Group, where it's at today, it's firstly from its inception and its evolution.
Simply, it was set up as an advocacy organisation. It does have a somewhat ambiguous name, Paradigm Research Group. I get that, and I've chosen to sort of stay with it. It was begun when I, again, decided that the issue needed to be engaged politically. So the first thing that I was able to do was to register as a lobbyist. No one had ever done this on this issue, and I knew it would gain attention when it happened. I was based near Washington, D.C. So I registered as a lobbyist, and I registered on behalf of a number of research organizations. Right, pro bono, to quote, represent their efforts in Washington, D.C., thus the name Paradigm Research Group. It was established for one reason only, to resolve the extraterrestrial presence issue through political means. And that's all that PRG has been doing since. It's been 18 years, almost 19. I didn't think it would take this long, to be honest with you.
Sure.
But it's not cut. When it comes to major political policy changes, it takes time. We've seen that over and over again. So over the years, we've done many things. PRG has conducted many projects. It has lobbied the media extensively, created 6 websites, 6 Facebook pages. It's held 6 conferences in Washington, D.C. area, 7, 8 press conferences, the National Press Club. I ran for Congress and got on the ballot in 2002 so that the issue could be raised in debates with the other candidates, the first person to ever do that. And so forth and so forth. It's just anything and everything that could raise awareness, engage the issue politically, and also demonstrate to the public a normal, what I call normalization of the issue, an approach that treated it like any other issue. That whatever ridicule had been developed by the government through its troop embargo, whatever misconceptions that existed, if the issue is still like anything else, and it deserved to be approached in certain appropriate ways, whether that be as having registered lobbyists, whether it be having a political action committee, whether it be having appropriate conferences, and so forth. And that process has been successful. I mean, there's no question that the issue is viewed by an increasing number of people as being a fully legitimate issue to engage, even if they don't necessarily have come to an opinion or a conviction regarding the reality of the phenomena. They increasingly accept the fact that by any reasonable standard it should be engaged this way.
Sure.
So that's what we've sort of accomplished in 18 years, among other things. And PRG is, PRG is hopefully in the process of finishing this off. I mean, I think that we're near the end of the race, and we're hoping to see disclosure by the president soon.
Definitely, it's been a long, arduous journey for you, Stephen, but you are quite tenacious and you're quite passionate about what you're doing, and you're doing this, like you say, to raise awareness. I think it's just to point out for the audience of viewers, we have new listeners all the time, Stephen, is that this is disclosure for the government, not for it's for everybody, but it's directed primarily at the government, because I think there's a large body of disclosure for out there in the public domain. Internet and various other sources and public opinion. I think the awareness is there. I want to talk about the government versus, need versus matters. I mean, I don't think we need the government. I do think it matters that we get the government to disclose, but I don't think we need them. I think we can do disclosure on our own and keep pushing it in the public domain. However, I do think it matters to the government. Would you agree that there's a need versus matters issue going on, Steve?
It's not that simple. There are 2 processes underway, and there is a bit of confusion, again, generated by terminology. It has come to be that the term, and I take a lot of responsibility for this, the term that has come to describe the event at which a head of state, most likely of a fairly developed country, major country, announces to the citizens of that country that the human race is not alone in the universe, and there's other sentient beings here, and they're engaging us now. They're in our airspace. They're in our world area. That is the event, and it's called disclosure. And it has a capital D. It's an event. It's like Christmas. It's like Halloween. It's an event. And that is absolutely essential to us going forward. Simultaneous with that, also happening, is disclosure with a small d. That's been going on for 68 years, from Roswell forward, primarily. And that process is also important. And in fact, the small d disclosure is one of the most important factors in achieving capital D disclosure. But small d disclosure has been going on for 68 years without capital D disclosure.
Gotcha.
So we've already seen without, I mean, this can go on. This process of disclose can go on and on without the event. Now, the best analogy that I can give that makes the point that your listeners can understand is that anti-war movements or peace movements or peace organizations have been making the case and bringing out information forever regarding the fact that war is not a productive or appropriate way to deal with political differences, and it's overall become as they say, a plague on the human race. And yet we still keep having them. Why do we keep having them? Because the governments decide they want to go to war, they go to war. And you can hold all the peace marches you want. You can exchange white papers and emails and set up websites all along. They decide to go to war, you go to war. And so the simple truth is that small d disclosure is not enough to generate the appropriate actions that are required to deal with this issue, meaning that until the governments acknowledge this issue and make it policy, the universities are not going to teach it, the press is not going to properly cover it or challenge the government on the issue, philanthropic organizations are not going to fund the private work. One of the reasons this has taken so long is this has all been funded out of people's pocket. The people generally were not wealthy at all, and we're not going to have a public policy on this. And so disclosure not only matters with a capital D, it is absolutely essential.
Wow, yeah, and the last hearing on this was, 1968? It's a long time to have elapsed. Perhaps the Cold War was the catalyst why that kind of, there was no further hearings on that.
Well, the Cold War was the reason for the truth embargo. For reasons which we don't know yet for sure, the explosion of the phenomenon, the extraterrestrial phenomenon. Notice I never use the acronym UFO. Mm-hmm. It's no longer applicable. It's nothing but a liability now, and it's part of the government propaganda. That the extraterrestrial exploded on the scene in 1947. It had been around, possibly going back thousands of years.
Oh yeah, yeah.
But in the modern era, in the era of television, radio, and complex societies, technology, it didn't explode on that scene until early 1947, at just the beginning of what would be the Cold War. The Cold War was forming right after World War II, but it wasn't clear which way it was going to go. By 47, it was pretty clear which way it was going to go. The Soviets had stolen, or had the necessary information to build hydrogen and atomic bombs, which they tested shortly thereafter. There was an Iron Curtain across Europe, as Churchill referred to in his 46 speech. The Soviets were taking a pretty hard line with respect to the post-World War II policies, as was the West. And there were plenty of people in the West that viewed the Soviets as a de facto enemy, almost from the beginning. And so the Cold War was about to begin. And of course, they didn't know it was going to be a Cold War. The idea of a Cold War was not in their head. That phrase didn't exist.
Sure.
As far as the military and planners, the national security experts in both the United States and Europe, particularly the UK, were, as far as they were concerned, the basis for the Third World War was now established, and that would probably be nuclear. Mm-hmm. And it would be worse than the Second World War, which I'm sure a lot of people thought would not be possible. What could possibly be worse than the Second World War? And so they had a major problem on their hands, and it was because of this Soviet West, the East-West problem, that was raising the prospects of the next war. Mm-hmm. that they decided that the extraterrestrial issue had to be contained. It had to be managed, and it certainly couldn't be acknowledged. And so they instituted what I call the truth embargo, a policy that was quickly agreed to by all of the United States allies, and of course the losers in World War II. I have very little to say about it. The Soviet Union and China went along with it. They didn't need to be brought into it under an agreement. They just went along with it. They had no desire to bring that out, given the nature of their ideological states. I mean, there's just no way they would have introduced that information into the kind of government or state that they would run. So the truth embargo got off to a very good start, and it turned out that we didn't have a third world war, though we came close. What we had was a Cold War, and it didn't last 4 years or 5 years like World War II. It lasted 44 years. And as a result, that 44-year span locked up the ET issue, meaning the government's policy was not going to change, and it was firmly prosecuted, meaning that they took whatever action they needed to take in order to maintain that truth embargo, and those actions were at times quite severe. By the time the truth embargo, by the time the Cold War ended, the truth embargo was virtually institutionalized, and as a result, it had its own life. It was the way it was, and unraveling was going to be a formidable challenge, which is what we've been doing, trying to do.
Sure, it's like there's a content management system in place at various institutions around the world for the truth embargo. It really is. So, Steve, let's fast forward.
It's a vast enterprise. The truth embargo is a highly sophisticated, found process.
Yeah. Institutionalized is the great way to explain it. So, Steve, let's fast forward. Okay, in the last 15 to 20 years, there's been a lot of stuff happening with the Paradigm Research Group. Let's focus on the congressional hearing, because that took you a long time to plan and get it to fruition, Steve. Let's tell us about the impact of that, the aim, the success, the pitfalls, the achievements.
In 1968, the U.S. government was feeling the pressure of the public's interest in the subject, and of course, research being done by the citizens, efforts by the very important and substantial organization called NICAP that had been already in operation for 20 years, National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena, and they wanted to get out from under it because it was getting harder and harder for them to respond to this pressure without creating more problems. So the idea was to walk away from it. And what they did was they held a congressional hearing. They had two of them, 66 and 68. The 68 hearing was part of the shutdown process. They brought a few people in, gave them a legitimate say, ridiculed one of the witnesses, which helped to result in his ultimate suicide. And then shortly after that, later in 1969, they issued the results of a report done at the University of Colorado called the Codman Report, which was basically a whitewash. It was set up to be a whitewash. That new report, this new, quote, study, unquote, came to the conclusion that there's nothing to this. They then took the results of that report and then officially announced that the Blue Book study, basically the government's Air Force-based investigations of this, going all the way back to Project Side, Project Grudge, we're done. Meaning, but it's nothing we can do. There's really nothing to this. We got to let it go because we can't waste our valuable time and your taxpayers' money. At the same time, they were in the process of destroying NICAP, which was a very important thing they had to do. They had to get rid of NICAP, and so what they did is, NICAP had a number of known CIA people that were on the board. It had a lot of powerful people that were part of NICAP. And what they did is they just threw Donald Keogh out, the man who founded it, Major Keogh, claiming improprieties, financial improprieties, whatever. And they shut down all of the field operations. They continued to collect dues, and the, quote, takeover board paid themselves a lot of money, actually, while the thing just died away. It took a few more years. And they were out. They were out of the game, they thought, circa 1968, 1969. Mm-hmm. And that's the way it stayed. Now, for the next about 9 years, and of course, one of the things that they couldn't do as the years went forward is have any more hearings. If you're out of the business and there's nothing to this, there can't be any congressional hearings. If there's congressional hearings, that's acknowledging there's something to this. And so any efforts to get hearings after 98 were simply stopped cold. In other words, consider the policy, there will be no congressional hearings, as a key component of the truth embargo.
Sure.
But then in 1979, things blew up in their face again, 78. And what happened in 1978, Stanton Friedman, the Canadian researcher, was introduced to Jesse Marcel Sr. And Jesse Marcel Sr. was dying of cancer and felt that he had nothing to lose by speaking out. And so it was Jesse Marcel Sr. that basically spilled the Roswell story brought it back out into play by telling Stanton Friedman what happened. Other researchers joined in, and the Roswell story very quickly became the event in the public's eye that connected the public to this issue, and is now, a major piece of evidence. And so from 79 forward, the truth embargo starts to come under increasing pressure, but no congressional hearings. And then what happens in 1991 is the Cold War is pretty much ended at that point. And the number one barrier to a change in policy by the government on the ET issue is gone. And starting in 92, not only does the political advocacy movement start to grow, but, and this is absolutely critical, witnesses start to come forward. Now, what I mean by witnesses, I don't mean someone that's had a sighting. I mean someone who has worked in the government, in politics, in civilian agencies. We call them military agency political witnesses, who have some rank, some station, and they are able to speak to events and evidence that helps to confirm the truth of this matter. These witnesses started accumulating. A few of them have died, but there are scores of these witnesses that have come forward since 92. And with each passing year, their willingness to come forward grows as they get older, as the truth embargo loosens, as their non-disclosure agreements expire, etc. And if it wasn't for the fact that some of them are dying off, I mean, that the numbers would just grow. And so between 92 and 2013, you had a X number of witnesses emerge and being featured in books, press conferences, the National Press Club, and so forth.
Sure.
And that witness emergence was critical to ending this truth embargo. And what had to happen, what was theoretically inevitable, was they would testify before Congress. Because when you've got witnesses testifying with that kind of material, that is absolute appropriate for congressional hearings to get the facts, find out what's going on under oath, and move forward. But of course, they couldn't happen. And every effort to get congressional hearings in the 90s and in the 90s and the first part of the 21st century were blocked. All of them. I mean, there have been a number of them. All stopped cold. But it was getting harder for them to do this. So what Paradigm Research Group did was, as part of a three-part strategy designed to end the truth embargo once and for all, the second part of that strategy was to hold a mock congressional hearing. And there really hadn't been anything ever done like this before. So,
yeah, very unique.
What we were able to do, because we got some funding, because it cost a lot of money to do this, is that we rented the ballroom of the National Press Club We could have done it at a hotel and saved probably $100,000 easily. But we felt it needed to be the bar of the press club. The National Press Club is obviously an extremely well-known organization in Washington. It's in the press building, so almost all of the offices beneath it, beneath the 13th floor where it resides, are press offices, or directly or indirectly press media offices.
Sure, sure.
It's 2 blocks from the White House. It's 10, 12 blocks from the Capitol. We rented that ballroom for a full week. We brought in 42 witnesses, 17 researchers, and 25 political military agency witnesses. And we had them testify in a mock hearing before 6 former members of Congress for 30 hours over 5 days. Nothing like it had ever been done, and we filmed it all. And so we had basically held the hearing that the Congress has been unable to hold, blocked from holding, for the previous 45 years. And we filmed it. Now, the whole reason for doing that was to force real hearings. And that is what's underway now. We held the mock hearing in April 29, May 3 at the National Press Club. The hearings went extremely well. The testimony was outstanding. The former members of Congress were completely into it. They were profoundly impressed by this testimony. They personally called for congressional hearings during that event and other things, showing a real, serious, and appropriate response. These are sharp people. They had over 80 years of service in the House and Senate. So the next step was to force real hearings. So what we did, it took a little longer than we wanted to. I'd hoped to have launched the 3rd phase of this effort in November of 2013, but it ended up taking another year. And so on November the 5th of 2014, we launched the Congressional Hearing Initiative. And that is still underway, and it's going to remain underway for a couple more months. What we did was we shipped the video record of the citizen hearing on disclosure, 30 hours, 10 DVD sets, this set, to every congressional office, which
costly, Stephen.
houses approximately 10,000
wow.
Capitol Hill staffers. We had a letter attached from the witnesses, signed by all the witnesses, calling for the Congress to hold hearings, calling for them to look at this material and see what needs to be done and look at the evidence that needs to be presented. And also to meet with me, a registered lobbyist for Paradigm Research Group. We then launched a social media campaign. Now, the citizen hearing, by the way, is home-based at citizenhearing.org. It's pretty basic.
Stephen, how do you develop the tactical maneuvers for what you're trying to achieve with the movement? Because every movement has this. It doesn't matter what movement or what the goal of the movement really is, but you need to be like a tactician in a way, Stephen. And if you want disclosure and you want to do it the best ability, this is obviously a great method to get these DVDs to the people that should have them. How do you develop that tactician?
It's a chess game. I started playing chess when I was about 7 years old. Chess game. The first move of this final end game, we would call it, was when we got a petition to the White House in September of 2011. That ultimately got enough signatures that the White House was forced to respond, and it responded on November the 4th of 2011.
How many signatures is that, Stephen?
It was about 12,000 signatures.
Wow.
To the White House website petition project they run called We the People, which I give them credit for doing. And we were like the second petition submitted, and we achieved the necessary signatures to get the response. It came on November the 4th. And in that response, the White House stated there was no evidence at all for any life outside the planet, no evidence for any extraterrestrial engagement of the human race, and no evidence that the government had even hidden anything. Of course, this was completely false. It was all a lie. And it was obviously a lie. It was an indefensible lie. But it was the first time in history that the president's the executive branch, the president, the White House, had ever put its position on this issue in writing.
Forced to respond, Steve.
Which is tactically, but they could have written 9 paragraphs of gobbledygook. And they could have written the kind of stuff that politicians do, where there's really nothing you can get from it and no way to attack it. Instead, they put a line, they drew a hard line in the sand, and said there's no evidence for this, which was tactically a huge blunder on their part, unless it was intentional, unless that was their way of helping us end this dilemma.
Make it obvious.
Meaning, we can't do it, but maybe you can, and here's a gift. In any event, that was the first move. The second move was the congressional hearing
I think that's
initiative. This is thought up in my head. I mean, this is the strategy that I came up with that I felt could work.
I think that's a very wise perception from you, Stephen. A very discerning point to make, again, is that they could have kept the disinformation going on the truth embargo with the gobbledygook paragraphs, but they chose to just be obviously blunderers or whatever, just to say, no, we don't know anything.
Yeah, absolutely. Not only we don't know anything. They didn't say that the White House does not know of any evidence. They said there is no evidence at all. Yeah. Now, look, almost nobody believes this. I mean, again, if it wasn't a truth embargo in play, and the media had really jumped all over that, which they could have, they didn't. They probably couldn't find 10% of the American people that would believe that statement, which is a very important thing. If the government if your nation's government issues a statement on a very important issue, and 90% of the people don't believe it, that is normally a huge issue.
Yeah.
But not the truth embargo prevents that. The truth embargo has insulated them from that. I mean, that's the kind of thing that would happen in ancient days. You know, the king would issue some new policy or make some statement, and 90% of the people in the kingdom wouldn't believe a word of it. But if they were to dare to object, they'd simply kill them.
Let's bring in...
but that's not the country that we want here, I don't think.
Just for posterity, Stephen, let's bring in Paul Hellyer, the Canadian defense guy, and Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut. I mean, basically, the government is denying this testimony.
Well, yeah, here's how one of the ways the truth embargo works is that no matter who says anything, no matter how high they rank in the military or in politics, you just ignore it. You do not respond. If you don't respond, you don't give the press more to work with. And that's how it goes. And that's how they've dealt with Edgar Mitchell, Gordon Cooper, Paul Hellyer, Philip Corso, anybody of high rank. Now, they don't have to respond to people that are not of rank and station. So if somebody has a sighting in Minnesota, they don't have to respond to that. If some people protest outside of the front of the White House for a day or two, they don't have to respond to that. But if a colonel, a highly regarded Army intelligence officer, like Colonel Corso, comes forward in a book that was essentially part of his memoirs called The Day After Roswell, and confirms that Roswell happened and there were bodies, and that he actually was dealing with some of the technology, you theoretically would respond to that. Not only there'd be a substantial response, the press would theoretically be going to the Army and asking them a load of questions. They did nothing. I mean, there was just no response at all to this. Same thing with Edgar Mitchell. I mean, Edgar Mitchell was Navy captain, astronaut, walked on the moon, Apollo 14. He's been stating that Roswell was an alien event, extraterrestrial event, since 1997. And the response from the NASA is nothing. Nothing. Because if they respond, then the press has a logical thing would be to then question them about, well, what's going on there? I mean, why is he saying that? What about this? What about that? Defend your response. They don't want to have that conversation, so they don't. They do nothing. I call it the dog that didn't bark strategy.
Wow.
So this is all part of the whole truth embargo complex.
It's like a
the only reason American people aren't absolutely fed up with this. I'm absolutely angered by it. Is that another component of the truth embargo is the media.
Yeah.
And the media is not doing its job in this issue, and as a result, the public are generally kept in a contained status.
It's almost like the chess game is nearing its fatal checkmate. It's nearing checkmate.
Oh, I believe it is nearing checkmate, because we're now in the third phase of this end game, and that's the congressional hearing initiative. So what we have is we got 30 hours of this testimony, which includes people like Paul Hellyer and Edgar Mitchell, and Air Force officers who witnessed firsthand the shutting down of our missiles by these extraterrestrial craft on numerous occasions. I mean, this is a huge story. Again, the press will not engage in. And these witnesses are ready to testify under oath. Now, what's critical here is understand, when these 42 witnesses testified in the citizen hearing under a, quote, citizen oath, which had no legal standing, that's one thing. But if they were to go onto Capitol Hill and give this same testimony under federal perjury charges as a result of a legal oath, that is quite a different matter. And that is, of course, one of the reasons why all attempts to get hearings have been blocked, because the government, the elements in the government that understand or deal with this issue know full well that these kinds of people, these quality people, cannot turn up on the Hill under oath. And so every effort to get hearings has been blocked. Now, that was then. This is 2015. And so we have launched what ultimately will be viewed as the most comprehensive effort to get hearings on the subject. We shipped the entire record of that testimony to every member of Congress's office. We launched a social media campaign at the same time. That campaign is being run from faxonwashington.org, F-A-X, on washington.org, disclosure.media, another website, and then also the Facebook page, the Disclosure Lobby. And since November the 5th, we've generated about 1 million messages, Twitter messages, Facebook messages, with the hashtag disclosure, and X number of emails to members of Congress. And many of these, particularly the Twitter and Facebook messages, are coming from everybody around the world. I mean, it's not limited to U.S. citizens. So we've rained about 1 million messages down on the Congress, letting them know that this testimony is on its way to them, that they need to look at it. The Washington Times has done 2 articles on this, making it very clear what's going on. So, and since that was in the political section of the Times, almost everybody in the Capitol Hill reads the political sections of the Times and the Post if they want to keep their jobs. So it's been pretty much announced to the Hill that we're on our way. Then, starting on the 7th, about the 7th of January, a couple things kicked in, and that was, one, we put another petition up on the White House website. This was the 7th disclosure petition. This one was the congressional hearing petition, namely, we want the president to support the convening of congressional hearing. And that petition has been up for about 20 days, and it will come down on February the 6th, probably going to end up with about 18,000 signatures. It won't get a response from the White House in this case because the threshold for that has been raised twice. Now it's at 100,000 signatures, which is very difficult to get. But nevertheless, it's been up on the White House website. At the same time, we began the process of engaging the offices. This, of course, was delayed until early January because the new Congress didn't take office or begin until January 3rd. Since then, we modified the focus to about 6 committees. There are 6 committees in the House and Senate that would be appropriate to hold congressional hearings. They comprise about 160 of the House and Senate members. And so the focus has been on them and will remain on them going forward. Every one of those offices has received a verbal request from me to meet with their appropriate staff. The appropriate staffer would be a legislative aide liaison to the committees that we're interested in. In a few days, they will all receive a fax request for this meeting. I have gotten calls back from the offices, and there's some dialogue going on. It's a slow process. But in due course, I hope to be meeting in offices with staffers to discuss the goal of this, which is we want hearings. And then the mainstream media process is being worked right now by our full-time publicist, who is approaching a range of media, political media, to get me on TV and radio, particularly television. And print, too.
Sure.
So that's all happening. And so all this is going to continue to unfold throughout the rest of this month and into February. And at some point, it's going to hit a sort of a critical mass. And out of that critical mass, I'm hoping to see a hearing commitment from one of the committees. Mm-hmm. And then things really will pick up speed. I mean, that things will go very fast. So that's what's underway. The witnesses are ready to testify. We have scores of them.
Wow.
All the witnesses, the citizen hearing, plus dozens more who would be more than happy to come and testify under oath. And so we're not talking about some one-day hearing here with 3 or 4 witnesses. We're talking a week or 2 weeks or more of hearings as these witnesses come forward and pour out under oath evidence that will convince any reasonable person of what half of the American people already believe.
Sure.
That, of course, this phenomenon is extraterrestrial.
With the disclosure movement, Stephen, and I commend you on the progress that you've made over this long journey. If it wasn't for the recent movement being as advanced as it is, I don't think we would have that testimony and the revival of the testimony. And yes, there are people that are dying out, basically, with this testimony from events of the past. However, let's focus back on maybe Rendlesham Forest. I've had Nick Pope and I've also had Robert Salas on joint on the show, and we focus on nuclear disarmament and the disclosure issue intertwined. I mean, is there a present danger that the government is holding on to? Maybe it's true or not, but is it because of this nuclear disarmament they don't want to admit to anything?
No. The nuclear tampering is one of the most important pieces of evidence and an indisputable basis by which the media should engage the issue of great depth and why the government should be asked very intense questions. But of course, since that nuclear tampering is being done by extraterrestrials, it's off the table. So let's just say that the connection, but let me go further. The connection between the nuclear history of the human race and the ETs is, I don't believe, incidental.
Sure.
That I believe that the explosion of phenomena, sightings, in other words, what really amounts to a change in extraterrestrial tactics. I mean, you don't go from 1 year having very few sightings, and the next year having an explosion of sightings, unless the ETs are doing something very different. True. I believe that was connected to the nuclear bombs dropped in Japan, and the nascent, of course, nuclear arms race that was any reasonable person would have concluded was inevitable as of 1947. So I think there's that connection there. The shutting down of nuclear weapons is one of the most important things that the ETs have done. It's the most significant exopolitical action on their part. Not only that they shut them down, but they let us turn them back on. And there's evidence they've done similar things in the Soviet Union. This is clearly an effort to somehow affect our policy in that regard. And it hardly could be construed as an encouragement for us to use that thing. So that's there. And I just have a hunch that the connection is great. So that's one of the reasons why the nuclear tampering evidence is one of the areas of evidence that will break this open, that will ultimately lead to a massive press engagement that will end the truth embargo. But we have to get these witnesses in front of a congressional hearing to do that. They have given press conferences There's been a couple of books written about them. I mean, the most important one being UFOs and Nukes by Robert Hastings, and an incredibly important work. Plus the activism of witnesses like Robert Salas, who also wrote a book, Faded Giant. I mean, but it hasn't been in front of a Congress. It hasn't been under penalty of perjury. As the years have passed, I don't think we've lost too many of the nuclear witnesses. The earliest events really go back to about 1967, 48 years. We've lost some, but as the years have gone by, the willingness of some of these military people, mostly retired, and frequently have gone on into important jobs. In other words, if you're a nuke base officer and then you retire from the Air Force, you're probably a desirable employee. And I just think a lot of them got good jobs in industry and so forth. And so they haven't wanted to come forward, but that's proven. And I think the willingness of them to come forward is greater. And I think if congressional hearings are announced, and we can then go out and recruit witnesses from that area, I think we're going to have quite a few. More than enough to absolutely overwhelm the debunkers, the naysayers, the skeptics, and other knuckleheads that somehow are determined to stand in the way of the human race advancing forward. So the nuclear issue is absolutely critical. And Rendlesham Forest, it turns out, was a nuclear incident, which wasn't clear in the early days, but I think the testimony has been further developed, and it looks like it was another nuclear incident, nuclear tampering incident, and so forth. So this just gives your list. Now, again, in order to, for those that don't appreciate the truth embargo and that policy and its prosecution all these decades, just think about this. If Air Force officers are coming forward and telling the press, writing books, that craft of non-human origin have come down, hovered over our nuclear bases, and turned our missiles off, and the press does not cover that as a major story, that is all you need to know about how powerful the truth embargo has been.
You know, I even think the truth embargo has a wider range of issues, not just the UFO. I shouldn't say UFO, Steve. I should say the extraterrestrial phenomenon.
Extraterrestrial phenomenon.
It's much more politically correct. But the extraterrestrial phenomenon, I think, is the biggest issue on the truth embargo. But I think the government, I don't think they're baddies. I just think they're painted themselves into a corner, and I don't think they want us to be, I don't think they want us to have the truth on anything, unless they can sanitize it first for their own benefit. And I just think maybe they're selfish, or maybe they're self-perpetuating their own goals, or whatever. I don't feel the need to paint them as baddies. I just think they've painted themselves into a corner.
Well, they have painted themselves into a corner. That I believe is true. I believe that the people that are making the calls here are all national security people. This issue is not being decided in the boardrooms of the oil company. It is being decided and maintained by the national security complex, who, by and large, are made up with good people, patriotic people, who make good money. They're not poor. They're not rich by any means. They go home. They watch cable TV. They can watch Ancient Aliens on History Channel like anybody else.
Sure.
And their kids probably do. And this is who make these decisions. And I think that the consensus, my colleagues and I sort of agree that the consensus within the military intelligence community about those that would have an opinion actually favors this. They would like to see this ended, but they can't. They can't do it. And there's reasons they can't do it. The principal one is they have painted themselves in a corner. Exactly right. What happened is that when the issue was removed from the oversight of the Congress and the executive branch, it was a tactical maneuver. They viewed the Congress and the president as tentative, as transitional, and the trust in the presidency is diminishing. Politics in America in general has been diminishing. The quality of the Congress has been diminishing. And so for that and other reasons, this was make life easier. They just aimed it out. So what that meant was that no member of Congress, including members of the Intelligence Committee, could have access to this issue. Underground facilities, research, re-engineering, dead bodies, whatever. No access, none. Not going to be briefed on it. No need to know. The president was treated the same way. And so when they did that, they created a problem. It may have been short-term, convenient for them, helpful for them. Long-term, it created a problem. And that problem was how to end it. How do you end this policy? And so the problem they created was this. The president, even though the president may personally believe that the extraterrestrial presence is real, could not get access to any information. He was on a need-to-know basis. And so the president could not come before the American people and say, look, I'm pretty sure there's extraterrestrials here, but I can't tell you anymore because the Pentagon won't give me any information. Right? That's not going to happen. The Pentagon, the CIA, or any other agency in that area could come forward and do it because that would be treason. The president is their boss. He's the commander-in-chief. It would be like the Pentagon launching a war on its own. That's a constitutional crisis. That's major. And of course, it's the end of your career. So it's like the two of them box themselves out. And what has had to happen, and what has been needed for some time now, is the president and the Pentagon have got to cut a deal. And this doesn't happen much in Washington anymore, but it has to happen in this. They need a deal. They need to come to an understanding of what the president needs to disclose and what the Pentagon needs if disclosure happens. And once they've reached an understanding and the quid pro quos have been signed, then the president can come forward. That deal has not been struck yet. Mm-hmm. The whole purpose of this chess game, mm-hmm. the whole purpose of this end game, mm-hmm. is to create a situation which is clear to the president and to the Pentagon that they have no choice but to cut that deal. And when that happens, it's over. And the media, the political media, probably be the deciding factor. Sure. When they turn on this issue, it'll be like two sides having a battle, and then a powerful third entity decides to pick sides. It comes in on one side or the other and ends it. That is the strategy, and that's where things are heading.
For sure. You know, I like to be always positive in everything I try to do, either on the show or to explain things to people or discussions. And I like to think of disclosure as a positive thing. I don't want to see it as a battle against the government or a battle against these, what you call, people think they're rogue agencies or whatever. I just think these guys are painted into a corner, like I say. And I like to think of disclosure as an amnesty for the truth, an amnesty for the people involved, an amnesty for the witnesses, that they can just have a clean slate and just forget the past, start from now, and where can we go with this?
Well, I agree. First of all, I don't think this is a battle. I think of it as a chess game.
Yeah.
There have been casualties in the past. I don't think that's the issue now, at least not in the area of extraterrestrial. There are other areas where perhaps more unpleasantness is taking place. But and this will be the most profound event in human history, opening up doors that primarily have been locked for a long time. And yes, I do not want to see nations and citizens suing each other for the rest of the century, or holding trials. It may be satisfying to some, but it is a distraction. We need to move on with reconstructing the post-disclosure world. So one of the very first things you'll hear from PRG in the post-disclosure era, meaning shortly after the president has made that announcement, is a call for an amnesty and a truth and reconciliation effort. PRG will try to lead that truth and reconciliation effort to the extent possible. These are two different programs. Truth and Reconciliation will be about those people living who did an illegal thing, broke the law in service to the truth embargo, who, if they choose to come forward and tell all that they know about what happened, would then be reconciled to their people, to the citizens. This is, of course, what happened. The most famous example of this is the Truth and Reconciliation program, both after apartheid system collapsed in South Africa. And then amnesty is different. Amnesty is essentially protection for those. They've not committed any crimes, but they do have information, and they want to come forward, and maybe even the government wants to come forward, but there needs to be a formal understanding, legal understanding, that if they do and they talk, that they're protected from any national security disclosure violations. So amnesty and truth and reconciliation, these will be the two programs PRG will be pushing for in order to minimize. Now that doesn't mean there won't be reparations. I anticipate there'll be some reparations post-disclosure. And I think the chances of the reparations are better if we are showing some appreciation and understanding for the government's position on the embargo itself. And so I'll also be supporting reparations where they're appropriate post-disclosure. So yeah, I want this to be positive. I think that the overall outcome is going to be good. I think we're going to learn some things post-disclosure, which will be upsetting. Some will consider negative. But that's the real world we're in. I mean, every day we get up. There are good things happening and bad things happening. And you deal with both. But at least if you know what's going on, you can deal with them. It's when you don't know. It's when it's secret, when it's hidden, when it's covered up. That's when bad things turn into very bad things.
What can people do? I mean, the exo-political revolution worldwide, I mean, people want to get involved. With all types of activism, the people and the citizens, they're going to want to do something. Petitions is probably a great one to mention. Where people do that?
Yeah. There's a limited number of things that people can do. I mean, we don't have a brick-and-mortar operation. There's no funding to hire hundreds of people. We're not like some political party that'll raise $300 million and have huge staff in order to get a person elected who probably won't make a damn bit of difference. But here's the things. One, in terms of the petition, there's still about 6 days. People can sign it and go to disclosurepetition.org, and you'll see the link directly over to the White House website. You can go to whitehouse.gov and find it, but sign the petition if you can. Every signature helps. The social media campaign, if you go to Facts on Washington, FAX on Washington.org, then you can see how you can send some messages by Facebook, Twitter, and email into the Congress. And the Facebook and email stuff the Facebook and Twitter stuff is anybody in the world can do this. Any nation, as long as you got a computer and an email address, you can do that. So do that. Join the social media campaign, which is going to go on for another few weeks. Obviously, if someone has the means to financially support this effort, which is, I can assure you, always underfunded, they can contact Paradigm Research Group, PRG at paradigmresearchgroup.org, or if you go to paradigmresearchgroup.org, there is a contribution button there. We have gotten more contributions and more support in the last couple of years, without question. It's getting better. But it's still not enough to really do all of the things that we would like to do to maximize the outcome. So these, and then of course, talk it up if you can. Talk it up. Press your media, and those in other countries, obviously, they can petition their government. There is exopolitical developments in progress in a number of countries, which is why PRG created the Exopolitics World Network back in 2009, and that's exopoliticsworld.net. Probably the largest and most focused advocacy effort, though, is in the United States.
Sure. Without
question.
Sure.
But that said, the overall awareness of this issue and the movement has created a situation as of 2015 where, frankly, there are a number of nations that could end the truth embargo tomorrow. And the two most leading candidates, oddly enough, are Russia and China.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if Russia or China ends the truth embargo ahead of the United States, the geopolitical implications for the United States are rather significant. And so I constantly mention that in my interviews so that the White House advisors will at least know that if they're advising the president that they got nothing to worry about from Vladimir Putin or Xi Jinping or any other nation going ahead and ending this embargo, they are wrong. And they are deeply misserving the President of the United States. So that's where we are right now. That's why I'm optimistic. It may not be from President Obama. It may very well be Vladimir Putin that does it. And if he does, I assure you, every other nation will follow very quickly.
I think the nations are hedging their bets, Stephen, who's going to do it and holding off and all sorts of stuff going on behind the scenes.
They're taking a great risk. The United States has made, look, we rolled the dice and said, we don't need to make hybrid automobiles, thus handing that market to the Japanese. We rolled the dice and believe that people really don't want very small cars to get around the cities, and through that market to Germany. Mm-hmm. You probably know the smart car.
Oh, yeah. That
little car is now turning up all over the U.S. That's all made by Mercedes-Benz.
Yeah.
We've rolled the dice so many times and been wrong.
Yeah.
By not seeing the obvious. That is why the United States is in decline. I mean, the United States isn't in decline because of some cosmic forces being forced upon it, or incredibly bad luck. The United States is in behind by one bad policy after another, mixed with substantial lack of foresight. And the failure to end this truth embargo is a cosmic example of this, which I hope that enough people in Washington will figure out one of these days. All I can do is let them know, and hope that they do the right thing.
For sure. Of course, ParadigmResearchGroup.org is the best site, I think, to get all the information on well-informed, well-written website. I guess in the personal sense, we're at the top of the hour. One last question. In a personal sense, how do you feel then after? Do you feel a sense of satisfaction or achievement in the goals that you set? How do you feel about the progress, just in a career, life review type of thing, Stephen?
I started this work late in life, so I feel the time pressure much more than I would have if I had been younger. Look, if I had started what I'm doing now in 1980 or something, it gone anywhere. I mean, that was before the Cold War, so it really couldn't get underway until after 92. But as it happens, I was of a certain age at that point, so I feel the pressure. 18 years is a long time, so there's a lot of frustration. But I try to remind myself that if you look at every major activist movement for social political change in the 20th century, going back to 1900, or even 1800, quite a few of the people that started it, in many cases that started, did not live to see the outcome. So why should I be any different? I'd love to live to see this done. I feel we have a shot here. I mean, the window is open. Over the last 20 years, what's happened is the window for disclosure has opened from time to time. Mm-hmm. And we tried to get through that window, but it closed before we could get through. And so you'll have periods of optimism, and I never predict a specific date. I have stated from time to time that we have a good opportunity now. We need to go forward. We've got a shot. This is the best window we've ever had. So I will be deeply disappointed if it closes before we get through it. Mm-hmm. And the kinds of things that will close this window are not pretty. The last time we had one of the most significant windows of opportunity we had was 2001, and that window was closed by the 9/11 events of 2001. Sure. There are now, even our own government is acknowledging events potentially on the table that are even worse than that. And one of those would shut this window again. And so I'm hoping that people will step up to the plate with financial support, with their moral support, and with whatever they can do on the internet to raise awareness and get us through before the next bad thing happens. That's one way that I put it.
Sure. Wow. Oceans of love and positivity to all the listeners out there. And you've been listening to Steve Bassett. This is your host, James. And, of course, ParadigmResearch.org for the main website.
ParadigmResearchGroup.org.
Sorry, ParadigmResearchGroup.org, Stephen. Mm-hmm. And, of course, there's plenty of petitions to sign there and get involved. And, Stephen, I wish you every success in your endeavours. And I just keep up the good work, brother. It's been great talking to you today.
Thank you, James. It's always wonderful to do interviews, and the internet. These kind of interviews are very important to our partners.
No, thank you again, Steve.
They're not alone in the universe, and there's other sentient beings here, mm-hmm. and they're engaging us now. They're in our airspace. They're in our world area. That is the event, and it's called disclosure, and it has a capital D. It's an event. It's like Christmas. It's like Halloween. Mm-hmm. It's an event. And that is absolutely essential to us going forward. Simultaneous with that, also happening is disclosure with a small d. That's been going on for 68 years, from Roswell forward, primarily. And that process is also important. Mm-hmm. And in fact, the small d disclosure is one of the most important factors in achieving capital D disclosure. But small d disclosure has been going on for 68 years without capital D disclosure.
Gotcha.
So we've already seen that without, this can go on. This process of disclose can go on and on without the event. Now, the best analogy that I can give that makes the point that your listeners can understand is that anti-war movements or peace movements or peace organizations have been making the case and bringing out information forever regarding the fact that war is not a productive or appropriate way to deal with political differences, and it's overall become a plague on the human race. And yet we still keep having them. Why do we keep having them? Because the governments decide they want to go to war, they go to war. And you can hold all the peace marches you want. You can exchange white papers and emails and set up websites all long. They decide to go to war, you go to war. And so the simple truth by any reasonable standard, it should be engaged this way.
Sure.
So that's what we've sort of accomplished in 18 years, among other things. And PRG is, PRG is hopefully in the process of finishing this off. I think that we're near the end of the race, and we're hoping to see disclosure by the president soon.
Mm. Definitely, it's been a long, arduous journey for you, Stephen, but you are quite tenacious and you're quite passionate about what you're doing, and you're doing this, like you say, to raise awareness. I think it's just to point out for the audience of viewers, we have new listeners all the time, Stephen, is that this is disclosure for the government. Not for it's for everybody, but it's directed primarily at the government, because I think there's a large body of disclosure for out there in the public domain. Internet and various other sources and public opinion. I think the awareness is there. I want to talk about the government versus, need versus matters. I don't think we need the government. I do think it matters that we get the government to disclose, but I don't think we need them. I think we can do disclosure on our own and keep pushing it in the public domain. However, I do think it matters to the government. Would you agree that there's a need versus matters issue going on, Steve?
It's not that simple. There are two processes underway, and there is a bit of confusion, again, generated by terminology. It has come to be that the term, and I take a lot of responsibility for this, the term that has come to describe the event at which a head of state, most likely of a fairly developed country, major country, announces to the citizens of that country that the human races group. It was established for one reason only: to resolve the extraterrestrial presence issue through political means. And that's all that PRG has been doing since. It's been 18 years, almost 19. I didn't think it would take this long, to be honest with you.
Sure.
But when it comes to major political policy changes, it takes time. We've seen that over and over again. So, over the years, we've done many things. PRG has conducted many projects. It has lobbied the media extensively, created 6 websites, 6 Facebook pages. It's held 6 conferences in Washington, D.C. area, 8 press conferences, the National Press Club. I ran for Congress and got on the ballot in 2002 so that the issue could be raised in debates with the other candidates, the first person to ever do that. And so forth and so forth. It's just anything and everything that could raise awareness, engage the issue politically, and also demonstrate to the public a normal, what I call normalization of the issue, an approach that treated it like any other issue. That whatever ridicule had been developed by the government through its troop embargo, whatever misconceptions that existed, if the issue is still like anything else, and it deserved to be approached in certain appropriate ways, whether that be as having registered lobbyists, whether it be having a political action committee, whether it be having appropriate conferences, and so forth. And that process has been successful. I mean, there's no question that the issue is viewed by an increasing number of people as being a fully legitimate issue to engage, even if they don't necessarily have come to an opinion or conviction regarding the reality of the phenomena. They increasingly accept the fact that...
Everybody, welcome back to Capricorn Radio. This is your host, James, and I'm delighted to be speaking to a new guest today, Mr. Stephen Bassett, a leading advocate for the ending the 60-year government-imposed truth embargo involving the extraterrestrial presence, engaging with the human race, political activist, lobbyist, commenter, columnist, conference producer, founder of the Paradigm Research Group, which we're going to get into today, and we're going to see where the research is at today. Also, the executive director of the Extraterrestrial Phenomena Political Action Committee, XPPAC, the creator of the Paradigm Clock, and the executive producer of the X Conference. I want to get into a little bit about that too. Going back as far as 96, Bassett, he has assisted many organizations and initiatives making the case for the end of the government's truth embargo, to open congressional hearings to take the testimony of former military and agency employees that have witnessed to extraterrestrial related events and evidence. He's also appeared on hundreds of radio and television talk shows, and I'm glad he's on Capricorn Radio today. So without further ado, let's bring on today's guest. Hi Stephen, welcome to the show.
It's great to be with you, James. Great to be with you.
Stephen, great to have you here. You know, if I'm fair to say, you really kind of... You came from, I think, the research of John Mack and got involved there, and then carved a niche in the UFO market, if you want to call it that, and research with the disclosure. And credit to you for that, Stephen, because you really have commanded this advocacy, as you call it. Great to see that has happened, because I think that was the part of the whole UFO research that was missing, Stephen. Would that be fair to say?
Well, it was part of the extraterrestrial phenomena issue that was missing, but the government was principally responsible for that. The government's position, going back to 1940s, 50s, was we won't do any investigations that can lead to a resolution. We will pretty much deny that there is a matter there to deal with. We will ignore witnesses. In other words, no matter how credible they are, we just won't respond. We'll undermine the research with disinformation when we can, and we'll contain the issue. So that was a political policy. Citizen scientists spent years studying the phenomena in every way possible with limited resources, and established a huge body of evidence. But it didn't matter. And ultimately, by the time I entered the field in '96, it was quite clear no amount of science would be enough to suddenly have the government come out and say, you got us. That this is a political policy that had to be addressed politically in order to get it resolved, at least in any time soon.
So you left Cambridge in '96 to set up the advocacy organisation, the Paradigm Research Group. Tell us the aim of the Paradigm Research Group, where it's at today, it's firstly from its inception and its evolution.
Simply, it was set up as an advocacy organization. It does have a somewhat ambiguous name, Paradigm Research Group. I get that, and I've chosen to sort of stay with it. It was begun when I, again, decided that the issue needed to be engaged politically. So the first thing that I was able to do was to register as a lobbyist. No one had ever done this on this issue, and I knew it would gain attention when it happened. I was based near Washington, D.C., so I registered as a lobbyist, and I registered on behalf of a number of research organizations, right, pro bono, to represent their efforts in Washington, D.C., thus the name Paradigm Research.